By 1944, the European front of World War II had entered a critical continuation. The Allied forces were preparing for a massive offensive to liberate Western Europe from Nazi occupation. This plan culminated in the Normandy landings, the largest amphibious assault in history. On June 6, 1944, this day, known as D-Day, marked the beginning of an operation that would determine the fate of the war. Omaha Beach would be the scene of some of the bloodiest and most difficult fighting in this massive operation. In January 1944, the Allies selected Dwight D. Eisenhower as the commander for the invasion, placing him within a flexible, fully integrated Anglo-American command structure. Under Eisenhower, Bernard Law Montgomery, who had previously faced Rommel in North Africa, was appointed as the leader of the ground invasion forces. While Eisenhower's chief of staff, Walter Bedell Smith, was American, most of his other key subordinates were British. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder served as his deputy, Admiral Bertram Ramsay was the naval commander, and Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory led the Expeditionary Air Forces. A Free French representative, Marie-Pierre Koenig, acted as a liaison between Joffre and Charles de Gaulle, the president of the French Committee of National Liberation. Montgomery's initial actions included insisting on and securing 5 divisions for the initial landing, along with expanding the landing area to encompass the Orne River estuary and the base of the Cotentin Peninsula. In the final version, known as the Montgomery Plan, the invasion force was composed of 5 infantry divisions, 2 American, 2 British, and 1 Canadian. These divisions were designated to land on beaches codenamed from west to east: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. On D-Day, the planned first day of the invasion, 2 American airborne divisions were to drop behind the western end of the assault zone and 1 British division at the eastern end, while amphibious tanks were to land with the first assault waves. The U.S. First Army, led by Major General Omar Bradley, consisted of American troops, while the British and Canadians formed the British Second Army under General Miles Dempsey. The British divisions had been undergoing intensive training since 1942, while the American divisions began their training in 1943. Meanwhile, extensive logistical preparations overseen by Lieutenant General J.C.H. Lee ensured that by May 1944, nearly 6,500 ships and landing craft were ready to deploy almost 200,000 vehicles and 600,000 tons of supplies within the first 3 weeks of the operation. The invasion was to be supported by over 13,000 fighter, bomber, and transport aircraft, while the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, could muster fewer than 400 aircraft on D-Day. From April 1st to June 5th, 1944, the British and American strategic air forces mobilized 11,000 aircraft, conducted 200,000 sorties, and dropped 195,000 tons of bombs on key targets such as French rail centers, road networks, German airfields, radar sites, military installations, and coastal artillery positions. Although the Allies lost 2,000 aircraft during these operations, the air campaign effectively destroyed all bridges over the Seine and Loire rivers, isolating the invasion zone from the rest of France. The Luftwaffe staff ultimately had to acknowledge that the overwhelming air superiority of the enemy was the decisive factor both before and during the invasion. The air campaign aimed not only to disrupt German preparations for the invasion, but also to function as a deception strategy. To mislead the Germans into thinking the landings would occur northeast of the Seine, particularly in the Pas-de-Calais area directly across from Dover, England, 2/3 of the bombs were dropped outside the actual invasion zone. Simultaneously, the Allies, through the highly classified Ultra operation, were able to intercept and decode German communications, giving them precise intelligence on the location of German counterattack forces. To further the deception, the Allies used fake radio transmissions to create a fictional army supposedly stationed in southeast England, across from Pas-de-Calais, and commanded by General George S. Patton. On the night of the invasion, They used airborne radar deception to create a phantom invasion fleet on German radar, appearing to cross the narrowest part of the channel, while a radar blackout concealed the real fleet en route to Normandy. The Germans were not entirely deceived. Hitler himself expressed a last-minute suspicion that Normandy might be the landing site. However, by that time, the defensive arrangements were already in place. During his brief command over the Atlantic Wall, Rommel had managed to significantly increase the number of mines, with around 4 million additional mines laid on the beaches by June 5th. Despite this, he couldn't position the German tank divisions as he had intended. Rundstedt preferred to keep the tanks in reserve, away from the coast, while Rommel, fearing that Allied aircraft would decimate them during their advance, wanted them positioned closer to the beaches. Hitler, attempting to resolve the disagreement, made the situation worse by assigning some divisions to Rommel, others to Rundstedt, and keeping some under his own control. The remainder of Rommel's Army Group B was composed of the infantry divisions of the 7th Army, led by Friedrich Dollmann, stationed in Normandy and Brittany, and the 15th Army, under Hans von Salmuth, positioned in Pas-de-Calais and further east. The reserve tank forces, known as Panzer Group West, and commanded by Leo Geyer von Schweppenburg, were nominally under Rundstedt's direct command. In a May 1943 conference in Washington, May 1944 was selected as the target date for the invasion. However, difficulties in gathering enough landing craft led to a delay, pushing the date to June. On May 17th, Eisenhower set June 5th as the firm and unchangeable date. As the day neared and troops started boarding for the crossing, bad weather moved in, creating concerns about hazardous landing conditions. After intense discussions, Eisenhower and his team decided to delay the invasion by 24 hours, necessitating the recall of some ships already en route. Finally, on the morning of June 5th, after receiving assurance from Chief Meteorologist James Martin Stagg that there would be a break in the weather, Eisenhower gave the go-ahead, declaring, "Okay, we'll go." Within hours, an armada of 3,000 landing craft, 2,500 additional ships, and 500 naval vessels began departing from English ports. That night, 822 aircraft, carrying paratroopers or towing gliders, soared over the Normandy landing zones, a small portion of the 13,000 aircraft that would support D-Day. The airborne troops led the charge, and their landings were notably successful. Despite many soldiers from the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions drowning after dropping into a deliberately flooded area at the base of the Cotentin Peninsula, they still managed to secure their objectives. Meanwhile, the British 6th Airborne Division more easily captured its unflooded targets at the eastern end and even secured vital bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River. When the seaborne forces began landing around 6:30 a.m. on June 6th, the British and Canadian units on Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches encountered light resistance and quickly advanced, as did the Americans at Utah Beach. However, the U.S. 1st Division at Omaha Beach faced fierce opposition from the well-prepared German 352nd Division, which inflicted heavy losses as the soldiers waded ashore. By mid-morning, the Omaha landing was on the brink of failure, but determined local leadership eventually pushed the troops inland, albeit with over 2,000 casualties. In the early hours of the morning, American soldiers approached Omaha Beach aboard landing craft, navigating through dark and treacherous waters. The beach was heavily fortified by German defenses, with machine gun nests and artillery positions waiting to unleash a deadly barrage. As the first waves of soldiers disembarked, they were met with a relentless hail of gunfire and explosions. The Germans had turned the beach into a killing field. The soldiers found themselves trapped between the sea and the heavily fortified German positions. Barbed wire, steel obstacles, and minefields turned the sandy shores into a deadly maze. Every step forward was a struggle, with shells raining down and machine gun fire cutting through the ranks. The beach quickly became a scene of chaos and carnage, with soldiers desperately seeking cover but finding none. Despite the overwhelming odds, the American forces pressed on. Small groups of soldiers began advancing, inching their way toward the enemy positions. Every inch of ground was won through sheer determination and courage. Ammunition ran low, and the fighting was often hand-to-hand as soldiers closed in on the German bunkers. The hours that followed were some of the bloodiest and most harrowing of the entire war. The battle for Omaha Beach demonstrated the incredible bravery and resolve of the American soldiers. Against all odds, they managed to breach the German defenses and secure the high ground. This victory was crucial in establishing the Allied foothold in Normandy, paving the way for the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi control. Omaha Beach became a symbol of both immense sacrifice and extraordinary heroism. The bloodshed and loss on that day underscored the high cost of victory, but it also marked a turning point in the war. The Allied forces, bolstered by their success, would continue their advance across Europe. Yet the memories of Omaha Beach, where so many gave their lives, would forever remind the world of the price of freedom. Meanwhile, the German High Command began to react, though Rommel was absent, being on leave at home. Initially, Hitler was reluctant to deploy the armored divisions for a counterattack. When he finally agreed, shortly after midday, units of the 21st Panzer Division advanced into the gap between the British 3rd and Canadian 3rd Divisions at Sword and Juno beaches, nearly reaching the coast. Had they succeeded, the landings could have been jeopardized. However, in the late evening, British anti-tank gunners at Perrier-sur-le-Don mounted a fierce resistance, halting the German advance and turning the tide. By June 7th, the beachhead was divided into 3 distinct sectors. The British and Canadian sector stretching from Caen to Bayeux. The US V Corps sector from Port-en-Bessin to Saint-Pierre-du-Mont. And the US 7 Corps sector, west of the Vire River behind Utah Beach. The narrow gap between Gold and Omaha beaches at Port-en-Bessin was swiftly closed. However, it wasn't until June 12th, after a fierce battle to take Carentan, that the American Corps managed to connect. This consolidation created a continuous beachhead with its deepest point southwest of Bayeux, where the V Corps had advanced nearly 15 miles, 25 kilometers, inland. Meanwhile, efforts were underway to quickly build 2 artificial harbors, codenamed Mulberry, to facilitate the offloading of vehicles and supplies until Cherbourg was secured. By June 11th, the outer breakwaters, made of sunken ships, were in place for each harbor. By June 19th, floating piers, designed to adjust with the tides, were halfway completed. However, a severe storm destroyed much of the infrastructure. As a result, the Americans chose to abandon their Mulberry Harbor, while the British harbor remained unused until July. In the interim, most supplies were landed on the beaches using various landing craft, landing ships, and amphibious trucks. DUKWs. In the fighting inland, the Allies faced significant challenges in the dense hedgerow terrain known as the bocage. While the airborne landings had secured the flanks of the beachhead, efforts to advance from the center were hindered by intense German resistance and counterattacks, particularly around Caen in the British-Canadian sector. A British armored push at Villers-Bocage was repelled on June 13th. Additionally, a major infantry offensive west of Caen, known as Operation Epsom, was unsuccessful from June 25th to 29th. This led to a sense of despondency at Schaeff, as it appeared that a stalemate was setting in. The situation was worsened by Montgomery's strategy, which aimed to draw German armor towards the British front and engage in a battle of attrition. However, the effective German defense led the Americans to question the viability of this approach. In reality, the Germans were also disheartened, as their relentless defense was depleting men and equipment that could not be replenished. Meanwhile, the Americans were benefiting from the fact that much of the German armor was engaged with the British forces. This allowed the Americans to break through into the Cotentin Peninsula and move toward Cherbourg. The final stronghold in the heavily fortified city fell on June 28th, and efforts to clear the port commenced immediately. The setbacks led to a crisis within the German High Command, which was further compounded by unexpected casualties. Dahlmann, commander of the 7th Army, died suddenly on June 28th, shortly after the surrender of Cherbourg's main garrison. While officially attributed to a heart attack, it is widely believed he may have committed suicide. On July 17th, Rommel was severely injured when his car was attacked by a British fighter aircraft. The situation worsened when Rundstedt, expressing defeatism, urged Hitler to seek peace and was dismissed on July 2nd, along with Geyer, the commander of Panzer Group West. Geyer was replaced by the experienced Heinrich Eberbach, while Rundstedt's position was taken over by Günther von Kluge, who soon adopted Rundstedt's pessimistic views. On July 20th, a conspiracy involving officers such as former Army Chief of Staff Ludwig Beck and Reserve Army Chief of Staff Klaus von Stauffenberg, who believed that removing Hitler was the only way to secure peace, attempted to assassinate him at his East Prussian headquarters in Rastenburg. The failure of the July plot resulted in Hitler consolidating his control over the army and exacting severe retribution on those suspected of involvement. Rommel was coerced into committing suicide in October, and Kluge took his own life on August 18th. By then, the German defense in Normandy had deteriorated significantly. Despite the failure of a major British armored offensive west of Caen, known as Operation Goodwood, on July 18th to 19th, the U.S. First Army engaged in a fierce battle of attrition around Saint-Lô during the 2nd and 3rd weeks of July. This hard-fought success laid the groundwork for the long-anticipated breakout. By July 25th, with most of the German tanks diverted westward by the British Operation Goodwood, the Americans faced a front with minimal armor. This allowed them to leverage their superiority in tank and infantry divisions, while the Allied Expeditionary Force brought overwhelming bombardment power to bear on the Germans. Operation Cobra, which commenced on July 25th, began with a devastating air raid. The breach created by this attack enabled the U.S. First Army to advance rapidly toward Avranches, which was captured on July 30th. At this juncture, George S. Patton's newly formed Third Army joined the push. This massive American offensive now threatened to penetrate Brittany and, with a strategic left turn, to encircle the Germans in Normandy from the rear. Hitler viewed the breakout as a chance to stabilize the front lines. He quickly redeployed the 2nd, 116th, and 1st and 2nd Panzer SS divisions westward and ordered Operation Lüttich, which aimed to strike behind the American spearhead and reach the sea at Avranches. However, ultra-interceptions of German communications warned the Americans of the impending threat. When Operation Lüttich began on August 7th, the Americans were prepared with robust anti-tank defenses. The German offensive was swiftly halted and defeated. As the American encirclement advanced eastward from Brittany, the British and Americans launched a vigorous push west of Caen towards Falaise. On August 16th, following the landing of a Franco-American force on the Riviera, Hitler finally acknowledged the situation's gravity and authorized a withdrawal from Normandy. The only escape route was through a gap between the converging American and British spearheads at Falaise, held by the recently arrived Polish 1st Armored Division. Despite the Polish force's valiant efforts, the remnants of the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army managed to break through the gap between August 16th and 19th. Approximately 240,000 German troops, though stripped of equipment, eventually reached the Seine River. They left behind around 50,000 dead and 200,000 prisoners in Normandy. By 1944, after 2 years of retreating in Russia, the Germans had become adept at organizing withdrawals. This expertise was evident during the Seine River crossings. Although all bridges had been destroyed by Allied air attacks, the Germans managed to improvise pontoons and ferries and executed effective rearguard actions to delay the Anglo-American advance from August 19th to 31st, allowing for the evacuation of all surviving troops. By the end of August, the Allies controlled the west bank of the Seine from the sea to Fontainebleau, with their spearheads reaching the Meuse River, 186 miles, 299 kilometers further. The mastermind behind the German withdrawal was Field Marshal Walter Model, known as the Führer's fireman, a seasoned Eastern Front veteran who had replaced Klug on August 17th. As Model rapidly withdrew the Germans across northern France into Belgium, resistance forces in Paris rose against the remaining German garrison on August 19th. Fighting ensued, and when news of the battle reached America and Britain, Eisenhower reversed his earlier decision to bypass Paris. He ordered the recently arrived Free French 2nd Armored Division to liberate the city. The division's advance units arrived on August 24th. The following morning, German city commander Dietrich von Choltitz surrendered both to the resistance and to Jacques-Philippe Leclerc, commander of the 2nd Armored Division. On August 26th, General Charles de Gaulle, head of the Free French, led a triumphant parade down the Champs-Élysées to Notre Dame Cathedral, where a victory mass was celebrated. Liberation had come at a high cost. More than 200,000 dead, wounded, and missing from the Allied armies, more than 300,000 from the German. French civilian losses numbered more than 12,000. Still, the Normandy campaign had been a stunning success. By early September 1944, all but a fraction of France had been liberated. The US, British, and Canadian forces had occupied Belgium and part of the Netherlands, and had reached the German frontier. They had, however, outrun their logistical support and lacked the strength to launch a culminating offensive. The coming winter would see much hard fighting, and a German counteroffensive in the Belgian Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, before the German army in the west was finally to be beaten. The events at Omaha Beach marked one of the most critical moments of World War II. On June 6, 1944, this landing became a pivotal step in the Allied effort to liberate Europe from Nazi occupation. The beach witnessed the heroic struggle of thousands of American soldiers. Their bravery turned the tide of the war and set the stage for the ultimate downfall of Nazi Germany. But this victory did not come easily. Omaha Beach saw some of the bloodiest and most intense fighting of the entire D-Day operation. The German defenses were ruthless in their resistance against the Allied forces. American soldiers stepped into a deadly battlefield, facing relentless machine gun fire, mortar shells, and booby traps. This beach became a stark reminder of the harsh realities of war. The casualties suffered at Omaha Beach highlight the immense cost of this victory. Thousands of soldiers gave their lives in the pursuit of freedom. The bloodshed on this shore stands as a reminder of the high price paid for the victory. Their sacrifices laid the foundation for the freedoms we enjoy today. The battle for Omaha Beach not only altered the course of history, but also shifted the momentum of the war in favor of the Allies. However, the stories behind this victory carry lessons that must not be forgotten. This documentary was created to honor those heroes who were there that day and to remind us of what they endured. If you appreciated this documentary, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking, and sharing the video. We would also love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment below. Your support is vital in helping us continue to produce content like this. Thank you.